Welcome back, everybody. Tennessee Titans franchise here on Madden 23. Today we will be kicking off the offseason here as we are now done with season number 2. And today we will go through player re-signings, free agency, trades, the coaching carousel, all that good stuff. We've got a pretty busy episode here today and a really good opportunity to reload our roster. In the last episode, we recapped the season. We saw what happened in the playoffs with the Dallas Cowboys ultimately beating the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. And we sort of previewed what the offseason could look like for us, who performed well this past season and who didn't, while trying to figure out what the best route for how we go about this offseason is in terms of acquiring players through free agency, with having much more cap flexibility than we did last year. So I think we've put ourselves in a good spot to spend some money if there are some good players available. We also went over some of the underclassmen who have recently declared for the draft. The next episode will be the NFL draft preview, where we go over everybody in the draft class, talk about some mock drafts and whatnot. And then the following episode will be the NFL draft itself, which should definitely be a lot of fun. So let's not waste any time and get started with the offseason here, and that'll begin with the staff phase. We will not be making any changes to the staff. Head coach Zebediah Phoenix received a contract extension at the end of the year. While I thought the two coordinators did a pretty good job, I think we used our players to their strengths, and our 11-6 record, I think, outperforms the level of talent we have on the roster, which speaks to the coaches and the coordinators. Not every coach was able to get the best of their team, though. We had 5 head coaches fired. Kevin O'Connell was relieved of his duties from the Minnesota Vikings. They were the worst team in the NFL, so not a major surprise. And the new head coach for the Vikings will be the former offensive coordinator of the Buccaneers, Byron Leftwich. I think this is a home run hire, seeing what Leftwich was able to do revitalizing Ryan Tannehill's career last year with the Buccaneers, and now he'll get to do it with a rookie quarterback, possibly Clemson's Cade Hutchinson if he is the pick at number 1. The Cardinals have fired Cliff Kingsbury. It's about damn time after Arizona finishes 3-14, an enticing team because of Kyler Murray. He's a very talented young quarterback, and he'll now get to work with Sean Payton, a big-time splash for the Arizona Cardinals, a proven offensive mind. He won a Super Bowl in New Orleans, albeit that was nearly 20 years ago, but he still is a Super Bowl champion, and he is still a really, really darn good coach. The Miami Dolphins have fired Mike McDaniel after just 2 seasons. The experiment and the glitter of the McDaniel offense really just didn't work out for the Dolphins. Tua might be on his way out as well. And they're going to be going with a different young offensive mastermind in Ben Johnson, who's been the offensive coordinator of the Lions for the past couple of seasons. They really liked what they saw with his development with quarterback Clyde Williamson. The Giants are firing Brian Daboll after just 2 seasons, so the Giants are going to get their 27th coach in what feels like the last 10 years. And that's going to be Lou Anarumo, the defensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals. This gives them a more older, experienced mind who I think can be a culture setter for the Giants. And then the surprise was the Seattle Seahawks. They fired Pete Carroll last year, they hired Pep Hamilton, and the team was pretty solid going 8-9, but they fired Hamilton after just 1 season, which really makes no sense. So they, I guess, didn't like what they saw from him. I don't really know why. The team certainly took a step up, and I think the reason why they fired him is because they wanted to make sort of an out-of-the-box hire, and that's going to be Peyton Manning. So Peyton is now going to be the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks in a shocking turn of event for Seattle. I don't really know why they fired Pep Hamilton, but clearly they like the idea of Peyton Manning coaching their team. So Peyton is back in the NFL as a head coach for the team who demolished him in the Super Bowl a number of years ago. So now let's get to the re-sign players phase. This also includes the player retirement as well, and there are some big names on this list and some surprising ones. Starting with our punter, Brett Kern, calling it a career after 16 seasons. An all-time great Tennessee Titan. He's been here through thick and thin. We have a young punter on the practice squad with Nelson Snomas, who I do like quite a bit. So I think the timing of Kern retiring is honestly pretty good. Other notable retirements include Xavier Rhodes and Harrison Smith, both most well known for their time in Minnesota with the Vikings. Demario Davis, Kevin Zeitler, Calais Campbell. Matthew Stafford is done in LA. The Rams might be looking for a new quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is done in Green Bay. Remember, the Packers drafted Genesis Moon out of Florida in the first round last year, so they don't need a quarterback. Ryan Tannehill is retiring. This is a shock to me. Tannehill had one of the best seasons of his career last year with the Buccaneers and was in line to make big money this offseason, but instead he is done. So Stafford, Rodgers, and Tannehill are all out. And now all of the old quarterbacks over the past decade are gone. Matt Ryan retired last year. Brady retired last year. All those guys have officially faded away. So let's now move into the re-signings phase, an opportunity for us to extend some players, let some guys go, and we've got a lot of key players up for contracts. We have a lot of money currently available, and we're certainly going to possibly look to save some money with cuts or trades once we get into free agency, but I don't think we have to worry about that right now. So there are some big names here, including Derrick Henry, Fletcher Cox, Christian Fulton, Taylor Lewan, Juan Thornhill, Garrett Pace as well. I think we've got to start with Derrick Henry because this has been a topic of discussion really since the start of last season. We talked about the possibility of trading him at the deadline. It didn't happen. And the reason why I didn't trade him is because I would like to bring him back. I understand he's 30, and, for a running back who's taken as many hits as he has, you'd think regression is inevitable. And through the first half of the year, he really did look like a shell of himself. He really improved throughout the year, although he did struggle in both playoff games. Was not good against the Chargers, had a bad fumble against the Steelers. So you could make the argument that it could be time for the Titans and Derrick Henry to leave. But he's just such an important piece to this team, I don't think we should. With him being 30, I'm only comfortable with giving him a one-year deal, so we're going to do a player-friendly salary for 1 year, and he says no. But we're going to franchise tag him. There's nobody else here who I think is worthy of the franchise tag, so Derrick Henry will be back in Tennessee next season. Let's move over to Fletcher Cox now, who had a hard time staying healthy. But when he was on the field, I think he was pretty good, and I think it would be in our best interest to bring him back. If he's healthy for a full season, I think he could be a really good number 2 pass rusher behind Harold Landry. Cox is 33 years old, but I do think there is still quite a bit left in the tank. So we're going to offer him a 1-year team-friendly deal, and he's going to say no. So Fletcher Cox will now officially be hitting the open market. Christian Fulton, to me, is very fascinating. He started this series with normal development and has gone up to X Factor seemingly for no reason. Last year, he had the breakout challenge in the Pro Bowl, which he completed, even though he did not make the Pro Bowl. And he has gone up in dev in each of the last 2 seasons at the end of the year for no real reason why. It's not like he finished high in any major statistic. It wasn't even like he was all that good this year. I thought Christian Fulton was honestly pretty disappointing this season, although he was very good in the playoffs, particularly in the first round against the Chargers, where he had 2 interceptions, and without those turnovers, I don't think we win that game. However, Fulton's just been very inconsistent throughout the year. His hands have been made of bricks. I feel like all the corners have been kind of inconsistent, so I don't really see him as a long-term guy. I'd be okay with bringing him back on a short-term deal, but he doesn't seem overly interested, so we may get back to him on the open market. Taylor Lewan is up next. He's 33 years old, and I think it's time to move on. Another all-time great Tennessee Titan. He's been a great ambassador for this organization. Well worth the 11th pick in the draft in 2014. But this is another guy who's had a hard time staying healthy. He missed some games this year. I think it would just be in our best interest to get younger at the left tackle position. Next up is Juan Thornhill. I thought he had a really good season for us, coming over from Kansas City on a 1-year deal. And I would not mind bringing him back at all, especially at that price tag. He looks quite cheap. The thing is, I think there could be some good safeties available in free agency, so I want to see what the safety market looks like. And if there's nobody else I'm interested in, we'll go back to Thornhill. Let's now move over to Garrett Pace, because he is obviously a fascinating player. He stepped in at quarterback when Malik Willis got hurt. He started the final 4 games of the regular season, along with both playoff games. I know a lot of people have mixed opinions on him. He was honestly not good in the regular season. Then he was fantastic in the first round against the Chargers. And of course, against the Steelers, he overthrew the game-winning touchdown pass, which would have sent us into the AFC Championship game. I think Pace did a good job, all things considered, with him being an undrafted rookie. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know if I see him as a franchise quarterback. I do want to bring him back, but he says no. So Garrett Pace will be hitting the open market, and I think there will be teams who are interested in him. As for some of their other starters, AJ Epineza and Cleveland Ferrell want too much money. I do want to bring back Randy Bullock, and this would be the first player to accept our contract offer. Finally, thank God. Other than that, there aren't any depth players I plan on re-signing here. There are some young guys I like, Alec Bostic, for example, but he's just asking for a little too much money. And that's sort of the case with a lot of these undrafted guys who we signed last year. I like a lot of them. I think they're good players, but I just don't see paying them this much money being worthwhile. So that's how we're going to use our resources during re-signings, bringing back Randy Bullock on a short one-year deal and franchise tagging star running back Derrick Henry. That'll bring us to free agency now, and this is where things get fun. Around the league, 7 different players ended up getting franchise tagged, including, of course, Derrick Henry. 6 other players around the league ended up getting the franchise tag as well, mostly players on the defensive side of the ball. Those guys being Nick Bosa from the San Francisco 49ers, Rashawn Gary with the Green Bay Packers, Miles Jack with the Steelers, and then 3 other guys who aren't being shown on that list, Trayvon Diggs, Antoine Winfield, and last but not least, Jeffrey Simmons with the Rams. Simmons and LA were not able to agree to a long-term contract. With Matthew Stafford retiring, the Rams might not be all that good next year. And of course, we have their first-round pick thanks to the Jeffrey Simmons trade. Simmons has played very well with the Rams, but I think they are slightly regretting that move. Let's move into free agency now. There are some pretty good players, particularly in terms of offensive skill position guys with Mike Evans, Darren Waller, Calvin Ridley, Cam Akers, amongst others, and some solid young defensive players across the board as well. In this first stage of free agency, we can offer 4 players. I know it's usually 5, but, Madden is glitched up. I do want to add some more money, and I think it would make sense to move on from Zach Cunningham. I think he's been a pretty good player the last 2 years, particularly Season 1, but he's 29 years old. He's not getting much younger. He was a little bit worse last year, although still quite solid. I think we could get some value for him. I just don't see him being worth $13.5 million as an average off-ball linebacker. So we're going to be trading Cunningham in a 6th rounder to the Bengals for a 4th. The Bengals do not have any middle linebackers on their roster, so I think it's a good deal for them. And for us, we clear some salary and we move up 2 rounds in the draft. But now off-ball linebacker becomes a need. We need somebody else to play alongside David Long. So let's take a look at some guys we can offer. We're going to start with Juan Thornhill. The safety market doesn't intrigue me that much. There are some good players like Cam Curl, Jordan Fuller, and Darnell Savage, but I would just rather bring back Juan Thornhill on a 2-year contract through his age 29 season. The defensive line class is also pretty weak, so why not bring back Fletcher Cox on a 1-year player-friendly offer? The third player we're going to go after here in this first stage is Garrett Pace. I would like him back at least as a backup, so we're going to offer him a 1-year extension. There is currently another team going after him, that being the New Orleans Saints, so they may want him. And then I wanted to make a splash for our last hire. There are some good corners in here like Christian Fulton, but the guy I'm going to go after here is Chidobe Awuzie. If you followed the channel for a while, this should be no surprise. Chidobe Awuzie is a fantastic corner, very, very consistent guy. He's 29 years old. He has spent the past few seasons with the Bengals. He was actually traded at the deadline this past season to the Dallas Cowboys, where he was originally drafted, and he ended up winning a Super Bowl with the Cowboys, being their number 2 corner behind Trayvon Diggs. Both him and Diggs were free agents, and obviously Dallas prioritized Trayvon Diggs, being the younger and better player, leaving Awuzie to entering the open market. You guys know I'm a big Chidobe Awuzie guy, so I can't really help myself. I think he's a fantastic player. He's a channel legend. We most know him from the Lions franchise I had all the way back in Madden 20 a few years ago, where he was a very, very good player for us. And I'm excited to have Chidobe back if we're able to sign him. We're going to offer him 1 year for $16.5 million. I know that's a lot of money, but it's only 1 year, and I think we have the financial resources to do it. So those are going to be the 4 players we go after in Stage 1. Chidobe Awuzie, Fletcher Cox, Juan Thornhill, and Garrett Pace. So I think a pretty good group of guys, 3 players who were already on the roster, and then Awuzie. As we simulate into Stage 2, 3 of those players accepted our offers, most notably Chidobe Awuzie. So he is going to join forces with Caleb Farley, Cardell Simpson, and Roger McCreary in the cornerback room. Cox and Thornhill also are both back. But obviously Chidobe Awuzie is the big name here. We're going to miss Christian Fulton. I hope he does well on his new team, but I do believe Awuzie is an upgrade, certainly for the short term, so he's probably going to be our cornerback 1 next year. Although those 3 players accepted, Garrett Pace did not. He signed a long 4-year deal with the New Orleans Saints for around $17 million total. So the Garrett Pace era in Tennessee is over. He is currently the highest rated QB on New Orleans. They very well could add a rookie, but for right now, Garrett Pace is the starter. As for us, this clears up any QB controversy that anybody may have had in their minds. Malik Willis looks like he's going to be the guy next year. He was always going to start before Garrett Pace. Malik Willis is better than Garrett Pace. Enough said. So let's move on to stage 2 now. Really looking for some solid depth pieces. We're going to go after offensive guard Netane Muti, a player I really liked coming out of Fresno State a few years ago. He's had a hard time staying healthy, but very, very talented. Malik Harrison will compete to be our second middle linebacker, along with David Long. Jordan Greer was on our team last year. He started a couple games at left tackle. I think he's pretty good. We're going to try to sign him for cheap. Akeem Davis-Gaither will also compete to be our number 2 middle linebacker, another guy who I like. We had him last year in our Philadelphia Eagles franchise, and he was a really good player. Letty Amon is a speedy wide receiver who's hopefully going to be our new kick and punt returner. We signed him as an undrafted free agent last year, but he got poached off our practice squad at the beginning of the season by the New England Patriots, so now we can finally bring him in. Cedric Woods will probably be our new backup quarterback. He comes from Middle Tennessee State, so he's a hometown kid. He was their starting quarterback in Season 1 of the NCAA Next Up series, where he led Middle Tennessee State to an undefeated regular season record and a college football playoff semifinal appearance. Kenton Gideon was another undrafted player we signed last year. We're going to try to bring him back on a 1-year deal for around $3 million total. Solid rotational pass rusher. Tommy Togiai was let go after 2 years with the Cleveland Browns. I think he could be some solid depth within the interior, especially with A.J. Epineza being gone. And then last but not least, I decided to go for a big swing with Darren Waller. I figured, why not? I know we don't really use the tight end position a whole lot in our offense, but I think a player like Darren Waller would change that. He's one of the best players at his position in the NFL, most known for his time with the Raiders. He was traded last year at the deadline to the Washington Commanders, where he didn't do a whole lot, but I think he could be a real weapon in the pass game for us. With him being 31 and starting to regress, I don't really want to sign him to a long-term deal, but I think a 1-year contract for around $11 million would be fair. There's another team bidding on him, that is the Buccaneers. They're a little bit ahead of us, but I figured it's worth a shot. If we don't get him, it's not the end of the world. While everybody else we're offering, we are the only bid for. So let's simulate into the next stage of free agency, and we would get Muti, Harrison, Togiai, Greer, and Woods to accept. We've got a few other players, Davis-Gaither, Amon, and Gideon, still weighing out offers, while Darren Waller did decide to sign with the Buccaneers, so unfortunately he will not be joining us. There are still some solid players in free agency, but I think I've accomplished everything I wanted to in terms of the free agency market. I did think about Brennan Ayuk. I really like him, but I don't want to invest a lot into a wide receiver right now with how much we've put into that position since last offseason with Mecole Hardman and, of course, Scotty Pickens. We do have some trades to talk about. I want to get active within the trade market, and there are still some holes on this roster, particularly left tackle. Taylor Lewan was let go. We have not signed a replacement, so I wanted to look around the trade market for some guys who I think could make sense. And I think Andrew Thomas could use a new home with the Giants. New York fired their head coach. They fired their GM, and I think a guy like Thomas could be on his way out as well. Andrew Thomas is a very talented player. The Giants used a top 5 pick on him, and it just hasn't really worked out. Thomas struggled early in his career, played very well in his second season, but the last 2 years he really hasn't been great. The Giants did sign him to the 5th-year option, but there is no penalty to let him go, and they just don't really want to pay $13 million to him. So I think this is a pretty fair trade. Dylan Raduns in a 4th-rounder to the Giants for Thomas and a 7th-rounder. I understand that Andrew Thomas has not been good the past 2 years, but I do see him as a real blue-chip talent, and I think with a change of scenery, he could be really, really good. We've got some decisions to make if he does play well, if we want to re-sign him, and if it doesn't work out, it's not like we're giving up a whole lot. I think Dylan Raduns is a pretty talented player who also is in need of a new home. When he was on the field last year, which was very inconsistently, he wasn't that bad. In 300 snaps, he only allowed 1 sack, but he was very inconsistently in and out of the lineup. He played around half of the game in both of the playoff matchups. He started a number of games. He was hurt for a number of games. He's just kind of the wild card and another player who maybe could work out for the Giants. Maybe he doesn't. I think it's a pretty fair deal for both sides. 2 players in needs of new change of sceneries. Thomas certainly has the higher ceiling, hence why we are giving up the better draft pick, and he will be our starting left tackle for next season. We do have a 5th-year option for one of our former first-round picks, Caleb Farley. I think this is a total no-brainer. Has Farley been perfect? No, but he's been, for the most part, very good the last 2 seasons. And I think him and Cardell Simpson can absolutely be the 1-2 punch at cornerback for the future. And of course, Chidobe Awuzie being there right now also helps as well. We're just going to have to figure out which one of those guys plays in the slot during nickel packages. So now that we've made our trade, I don't think we're going to do any more. I do want to look at some moves around the rest of the league because there are some big ones. The Buccaneers will be trading Chris Godwin and a 4th to the Bears for the 39th pick in the draft. The Bucs seem to be retooling with Mike Evans and Ryan Tannehill gone. Chris Godwin is next. The Bears need a true number 1 receiver, and that can be Chris Godwin, who has been fantastic the last few seasons with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Giants are also looking for a number 1 wide receiver. They'll be getting Mike Williams from the Chargers. Mike Williams is starting to get a little bit older. The Chargers have a lot of the young guys they like at wide receiver. They extended Quez Watkins, who had a great season last year. They drafted Quentin Spencer in the 3rd round. And of course, they have to pay Justin Herbert the big bucks, which means trading away some other good players. As for New York, they get a legit number 1 receiver for most likely the rookie quarterback who they are inevitably going to draft in the NFL draft this year. The Philadelphia Eagles do not need both Mike Gesicki and Dallas Goedert, so they'll be trading Goedert along with a 5th to the Raiders for a 3rd. So Vegas adds another weapon to the offense. The Dolphins are kind of starting to rebuild. They're trading Javon Holland in a 7th to the Jags for pick 42. I know this seems a little bit puzzling for the Dolphins because Holland is only 24 years old, but they don't want to pay Javon Holland. He's on the last year of his deal. He had the worst season of his career last year, and they're not comfortable with giving him top dollar, whereas the Jaguars probably are. But the Dolphins are not done, though. They're planning on trading another player, that being quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. With them firing their head coach and their GM, Tua looks like he's out the door next. The Dolphins drafted Jackson Kayuma in the 2nd round last year. Not to mention, they have the 3rd pick in the draft if they really like one of the top guys this year. And they are heavily linked to Jalen Hurts. So those are 3 options that look better to them than starting Tua. He is being traded to the New York Giants for the 36th pick, the 100th pick, and a 5th rounder next year. You got to keep in mind, Tua's a good player. He was fantastic in Season 1 of this series. Last year, he wasn't as good, hence why the Dolphins don't want to pay him. But he has shown the ability to be a franchise quarterback, and the New York Giants clearly recognize that. So I guess the Giants will not be drafting a quarterback next year after all, and instead, they believe that Tua can be the future of their team going forward. Would have been a lot easier if they drafted Tua in 2020 instead of Andrew Thomas, but beggars be choosers, I guess. So let's simulate now to the end of free agency and take a little look at the free agency recap. Take a look at some of the signings around the NFL. Overall, I thought we did a pretty good job. We added a top-flight corner in Chidobe Awuzie. We bought a lot of our key guys back and some solid young depth players. Let's start with the quarterbacks who were signed. So Jameis Winston is back in New Orleans, which means Garrett Pace won't be starting next year. Jalen Hurts does sign with the Dolphins, so Jackson Kayuma can be trade bait, and that number 3 pick can be used also as trade bait, or they can just pick one of the best position players in the draft, like a Jameer Jefferson Jr. or somebody like that. The Los Angeles Rams ended up signing Jimmy Garoppolo to a short contract. Do I think the Rams are going to draft a quarterback this year? Yes, I still think they will. Maybe they move late into the 1st round for a guy like Sidney McDonald or DeAndre Smith. The Bucs signed Jordan Love. That's kind of fascinating. I'm curious to see if they believe that he can be their starter next year because he's the only quarterback on their roster. Let's take a look at some teams around the league who I think, as of right now, will likely pick a quarterback in this year's draft. The Minnesota Vikings had the number 1 pick, and as of now, chances are that'll be Clemson's Kate Hutchinson. I still think the Bucs probably draft one. The Colts could, although they did draft Jonah Moliuer in the 3rd round last year. The Washington Commanders certainly will be drafting one. The Marcus Mariota experiment didn't really work. The Rams, I think, will be drafting a quarterback despite signing Jimmy Garoppolo. Seattle, with losing Jalen Hurts, I think they're certainly going to look to draft a replacement. And then the Houston Texans, I expect, will as well, with one of their 2 first-rounders. Some wild cards of teams who may be keeping their eyes out on quarterbacks include the Bears, Falcons, Jets, really teams with young QBs who aren't established. The Raiders, maybe they move on from Derek Carr. And then the last wild card, I would say, is the Tennessee Titans. Malik Willis is not yet fully established as the franchise quarterback. So, given the opportunity, I don't think the Titans would rule out drafting a quarterback this year, although it's maybe not at the top of their list of needs, but I think they would certainly consider it. Let's take a look at some other positions around the league. Mike Evans signs with the Rams, so whichever rookie QB the Rams get will get to be coached by Sean McVay and throw passes to Cooper Kupp and Mike Evans. If I was a rookie quarterback, I would certainly hope to get drafted by the Rams. Darren Waller will join the new-look Buccaneers offense. Cam Akers signs with the Dolphins. Calvin Ridley joins the Chiefs because apparently trading for Justin Jefferson is not enough. So he will join forces with Mahomes, Jefferson, and Travis Kelce. Obviously, we signed Chidobe, Darius Slay to the Falcons, Noah Fant to the Vikings, Bobby Wagner to the Lions. Brandon Ayuk signs with the Chiefs because they still cannot have enough wide receivers. Tyler Higbee's now in our division. He signs with the Texans. Christian Fulton is a Bronco. I like that fit for him. Pair him up with Patrick Surtain. That's going to be a nice duo. Kendrick Bourne signs with the Chiefs. So Kansas City has signed 3 really good receivers. Not to mention they have Justin Jefferson, along with recent day 2 draft picks, Jaden Wilson-Miller, who has superstar X Factor, and Sky Moore. Would this mean that Jaden Wilson-Miller, who's currently wide receiver 5, is available for trade? Because I really liked him coming out of Alabama, and he played well for the Chiefs this year down the stretch. Not to mention they have Travis Kelce, of course, at tight end, and Patrick Mahomes is throwing all these guys the football. So nobody's going to be able to stop the Chiefs' offense whatsoever. Mahomes might throw for 8,000 yards next year. Here are some of the other signings. A.J. Dillon to the Rams, Cam Curl to the Chiefs because apparently they have unlimited money and they can sign anybody that they want. Darnell Mooney to the Broncos, Jadeveon Clowney back to the Texans, Laviska Shenault, ironically, to the Panthers, the team who traded for him in real life. The Chiefs signed Jonathan Grenard, again because they have unlimited money. I thought about Grenard. I thought maybe he could be a good piece for us, but ultimately I decided not to. And Allen Robinson is back with the Jaguars. That is kind of ironic. So that is all of the notable free agent signings around the league, and that'll pretty much... Oh, by the way, Taylor Lewan is a Buccaneer now. Good for him, I guess. So that's pretty much going to wrap up the episode. Next time around, we've got the NFL Draft Preview. We're going to go through every position, talk about some of the top prospects, talk about some fits with our team. We're going to look at some mock drafts. We might even make our own mock draft. So it's going to be fun, especially with 2 first-rounders and 2 second-rounders. We've got a lot of ammo to move up and down the draft board and get players who we really like for our future. So that's going to wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out. Tighten up.